Welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, August 18th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about the 2024 Republican primary in the state of New Hampshire and new polling data from Emerson College, an A-rated pollster by FiveThirtyEight, and many other orgs that show that Emerson is amongst the most accurate in terms of statewide and many national polls as well. They are showing that Ron DeSantis has dropped to third place against Governor Chris Christie, now in second place according to this poll, and of course the first place major vote getter, President Donald Trump. Now, this New Hampshire poll really serves as a point of interest because of its change in the top two. The change being that Ron DeSantis is now in third with Chris Christie in second, and although many of them are in a very, very distant third, fourth, fifth place, it's always interesting to see some of the lower dynamics amongst the candidates that aren't the former president. Because for a while now, the 2024 nomination has largely been a race of not Trump and Trump, meaning that Donald Trump has been dominating with roughly 50% of the vote in early primary states and nationwide, with the other 50% being split amongst the remaining 12 other candidates. Whether that's Chris Christie, Ron DeSantis, Tim Scott, Doug Burgum, Nikki Haley, and all the rest, all of these candidates have started to be in a position where voters are splitting their non-Trump vote instead of consolidating around one candidate, all of which are hoping to be in the future that said one candidate, because that's how they know that that is their possibility at winning. I think there were many lessons taken away from the 2016 New Hampshire primary and the national primary that said, even though Donald Trump seemed to be leading very heavily, the majority of the party was not on his side. Now, that's a bit different this time around. Roughly 60% of the party is on his side, but 60 to 40 is a hell of a lot closer than 60 to 10 to 9 to 8 to 7. Because you are seeing such a significant split amongst the electorate, amongst the remaining candidates, they're all hoping to be that one consolidating candidate. And for a while, it was Governor DeSantis. But now, it looks like at least in New Hampshire, Chris Christie is doing quite well. Now, Chris Christie, even in 2016, got just 7% of the vote in the first time he was running in this race. He was 3 years off the time that he was governor. His approval rating had faltered. He had become very unpopular within the state of New Jersey, but still was a major presidential contender. He was very anti-Trump, went against him in the primary debates, went against everyone else too, notably Senator Marco Rubio, but he was still, vying for that presidential spot. Really thought that there was a good chance that Chris Christie was going to be the next president. He was going to be able to win the primary here. But seeing where he is then versus where he is now, it's always interesting because Chris Christie, 8 years ago from when this primary will be held, was getting less than he is expected to, according to Emerson College. Now, the actual average here isn't as favorable for Chris Christie. I'm not trying to mislead you when I talk about this third place poll, but the reason I trust it is because unlike every other of these polls that we have seen across the state of New Hampshire, it is amongst the most accurate and was one of the most accurate in the last midterm elections. We can see that in 2022, there were a number of polls where there weren't too many far-off differences. For example, their poll that had to do with the Georgia runoff election, they said that Warnock would win by 1.6. He ended up winning by 2.8. In many of the races, though there were slight differences, they were in some of the more safe ones. For example, New Hampshire's governorship, they said that Chris Sununu would win by 21. He won by 16, a difference of 5 points, but still pretty accurate in terms of overall predictive winners. And, you really didn't see much else wrong about their polls except for a few. For one instance, they had some House races in Nevada that were a little bit off, but more notably, the Pennsylvania Senate race, which was their only major misstep when it came down to the victory there in Pennsylvania and Arizona's Senate race. When it came down to many other races, they were nearly spot on, and they're a reputable source. I take their polls, especially in the regions that they know best. New Hampshire being one of them. Emerson College is located in Boston. They do a good job at capturing voter sentiment, especially in the New England area. And I think that looking at where they are in the state of New Hampshire, I trust these results. I think they are quite accurate, and comparing them to the three most recent polls in New Hampshire, Chris Christie and Ron DeSantis are practically neck and neck. You see AG National Research showing Christie at 8, DeSantis at 11. Trafalgar releasing their first poll of the cycle showing Christie at 9 and DeSantis at 11. It's a very interesting point for both of these candidates to be roughly close, considering that Ron DeSantis was this major candidate just a few months ago who has seemed to fade increasingly and increasingly more into irrelevancy as we have gotten closer to the actual primary season. Today, Ron DeSantis polls at just 14.8%, but the fascinating thing is the difference in support that we see in New Hampshire for Chris Christie that we see on the national level. Just 2.7% of national respondents say that they want Chris Christie to be the Republican nominee versus an average here of third place at 8% for Chris Christie, 2.7 versus 8. Ron DeSantis, however, is underperforming versus his national amount, 14.8% on the national margin, 13.3% on the New Hampshire margin. Now, looking at this top-level headline here, Donald Trump very obviously has the lead. The reason we are focusing on these narrowing races is because there is a strong possibility that depending on how the first few primaries go, many of these candidates decide to drop. For instance, if you're getting last place in Iowa and 7th place in New Hampshire, there's no purpose of staying in the race. And that could be the case for many of these candidates who have been, for a while, some mainstream Republicans that were considered very heavily for the 2024 nomination. For example, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who served also as South Carolina governor. There's a good chance, based off what we're seeing in this poll, that she ends up in 5th or 6th place statewide. She, for a while, was seen as this mainstream, prominent Republican who could peel voters away from Donald Trump and the non-Trump voting groups, but yet she remains at 4%. You also see that with the case of Senator Tim Scott. From the state of South Carolina, a lot of hype surrounding his announcement. There's a good possibility that he fades off into irrelevancy, as we have seen with many other candidates, and he drops out very early on with abysmal performances in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, because these primaries set the tone for the remainder of the race. They build momentum, they change sentiment, they change perception on these candidates, and if Ron DeSantis gets 3rd place in any of the top 4, his campaign season is over. Ron DeSantis needs strong showings if he has any chance at challenging Donald Trump in more fortunate, more beneficial states later down the line. But what we have seen in many of these early numbers is that simply isn't happening. We can see in these 2024 GOP polls that in Iowa, Trump leads by 26. Ron DeSantis within 3 points of being dethroned by Tim Scott. We see it when it comes down not only to the national level. Let's see if we can pull up some South Carolina data, but Arizona's Republican primary here, where Donald Trump leads by 47%. Another one done by Noble Predictive Insights, used to be OH Predictive Insights, if you recognize it by that. Donald Trump leads by 31. Michigan's Republican primary, also done by Emerson College, showing Ron DeSantis at 13% and Donald Trump at 61, a 48-point advantage. These early states that really do matter, I think we'll be able to find it by navigating throughout this state here. Let's see if there's any New Hampshire or South Carolina polls for the GOP. You can see that Ron DeSantis is at 17%, Nikki Haley is at 13.3%, Tim Scott is at 9% here, notably Chris Christie at 2.5%. But some of the headlines here, and though there aren't many recent polls, the most recent one done is by Fox Business during July 2023, we can see that Ron DeSantis has a very good chance in South Carolina, in New Hampshire, and potentially even in Iowa, based off where we are right now. Tim Scott doing well at 11% of Iowa compared to Ron DeSantis' 17%. I mean, this is a 6-point advantage over the next candidate. That's not a two-way race. That's a one-man race with everybody straggling behind. And Ron DeSantis has been very quick, his surrogates himself, to try to paint out this race to be a two-way race between President Trump and himself. But you see here, right? You see Ron DeSantis at 13% in New Hampshire, Chris Christie at 8%. That is a 5-point advantage. And again, you don't have the Nevada numbers, but you head over to South Carolina and you see that Ron DeSantis is at 17, Nikki Haley is at 13. That is a 4-point advantage. The differences between DeSantis and everybody else is starting to narrow down. And for the first time, a very reputable, very major polling firm shows Chris Christie in the second place position and Ron DeSantis in 3rd place. It is only a matter of time, based off where the current trends are going, that Ron DeSantis begins to enter into 3rd place territory. Even some national polls, though I do caution and I say I don't trust online polls as much as I do calling polls, you still see that there is a national push away from Ron DeSantis that is platforming other candidates. Even though Donald Trump maintains his 40-point lead no matter who's in the second place position, for instance, Vivek Ramaswamy, who started out at 1%, is now at 7% nationwide. That's to Ron DeSantis' 15%. That is a difference here of just 8 percentage points versus when Ron DeSantis started out in a very good position, or not even before he announced, because it had already been summertime by the time he announced, but around the time where Ron DeSantis was doing very well against Donald Trump, according to Real Clear Politics, 538 has a better metric that shows that at one point in time, DeSantis was within 3 points of the former president here. You can see that Ron DeSantis at this point was 24 points ahead of the next candidate, 24 points ahead, and just 15 within Donald Trump. Today, he has 40 points between Donald Trump and just, again, 8 points between him and the next candidate. So you are seeing this support not being pulled away from Donald Trump, but rather away from DeSantis and being siphoned into other voting blocks, being siphoned to Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, Mike Pence, Vivek Ramaswamy, Chris Christie. And it's happening not only nationally, but as the title of this video tells you, and as we have seen in the Iowa and South Carolina polls, is happening in these early states. This idea that DeSantis was in this one-to-one race was helping his candidacy. People wanted to back a unifier. They wanted to go with somebody that they believed could take on Donald Trump. They may not have loved Ron DeSantis. They may not have agreed with him on everything, but they wanted an alternative. But now that they're faced with candidates, senators, governors, representatives that fit their narrative more, fit their niche more, they are opting for them over Ron DeSantis because Ron DeSantis has become so unpopular. When you take a look at his favorability polls that were taken months ago, he was in a much better position. Right after he won in Florida's governor race by 20 percentage points, his average being approved of was plus 8 to 10 points nationwide. You saw mainstream political polls that had a considerable portion of the electorate. For instance, Harvard-Harris done back in March of 2023, just this year, that showed Ron DeSantis with an overall net positive of 13 points nationwide, with nearly 2/3, in fact, more than 2/3 of all respondents saying they knew who he was. Since then, nearly every single poll has been negative, including a shift in the Harvard-Harris poll that had him up plus 13, stands to be the only one that has him up by 3 today. But Economist and YouGov down negative 15, whereas previously his poll back in May had him up by 9, with the same number of people saying they recognize his name and know who he is. Fox News, not necessarily the most favorable pollster when it comes down to anything anti-Ron DeSantis, anything anti-Republican here. Negative 21. Quinnipiac University, negative 17. New York Times, Siena College, negative 17. The trend here is that because Ron DeSantis has become so disliked, people are opting for other candidates, even on the Republican side, because they no longer see him as this unifier or this candidate that needs to be supported for a one-on-one race. I think that is really the trouble that Ron DeSantis is facing, and ultimately, it's benefiting everybody else. The one candidate, though, that goes entirely untouched, unscathed by this change in the remaining candidates, you guessed it, former President Donald Trump. He starts out with a considerable lead in the state of New Hampshire, maintains it, and is able to win amongst the Republican base. You can see here, he started off with 52.8% July 4th, 2022. Today, 54.7%. Ron DeSantis, however, has lost support, right? Donald Trump for a while, though, was dipping following the midterms. You saw an immediate dip. The midterm elections happened. Trump was up plus 31. Immediately following, up just plus 18. Literally within a 1-week period, his support went from being up plus 31 down to just being up plus 18. And that trend continued until the Real Clear Politics average has Trump up at worst by 15. Again, 538 has different polls, different metrics, and you can see that for a while, Ron DeSantis did quite well. He was within actually 2 percentage points back in January 6th. I didn't choose that date on purpose, but it's funny. January 6th, 2023. That is where Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump were within 2 points of each other. Donald Trump did quite well here. Ron DeSantis did quite well here. Actually, that's an understatement. He did phenomenally. This was a very good place to be, and to consider the fact that today he's at just 15% really goes to show that Donald Trump has expanded his base, while Ron DeSantis has simply lost it. Not just to Donald Trump, but to many other candidates that were supposed to be these unifying candidates that would back Ron DeSantis. Many of them pledged that if Donald Trump had entered into the race, they would not enter into the race. We know now that that simply isn't true. But altogether, what I take away from this is that New Hampshire is just the start of a trend, just the start of something we will be seeing over the next couple of months that will lead into the primary season, that shows just how bad Ron DeSantis is in terms of his place in the primary, in terms of likability, in terms of soon-to-be electability. Because as voters begin to see him more, the less they like of him. New Hampshire, of all states, has seen Ron DeSantis the most, and yet for some reason, that seems to be having a negative effect on his primary chances in this state. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2023 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.